Hello, my name's David Brett. I'm the editor of the New Westminster Times, and joining me today is Dallas Brodie, leader of One BC and MLA in Victoria. Thanks for joining us, Dallas.
Thanks for having me, David.
This is great. Well, it's a busy time. Big things are happening with the Conservative Party of BC leadership race, and you have recently struck a deal with Yuri Fulmer, one of the leadership hopefuls, and that has made a lot of news. So uh, maybe just to kick things off, you could give us a bit of a snapshot on what that means and what the key details are of the deal with Yuri.
Well, first of all, Yuri's team approached me. It was the Thursday or Friday before. They reached out and said they reached out to someone who knew me and said, "Do you know Dallas?" And that person said yes. And do you think she'd be willing to meet with us? And so that's where it started. I had not really ever. I'd met Yuri once briefly prior to that, but we agreed to have a meeting, and that meeting turned into a deal. We negotiated for 10 hours on that Sunday. So that was last Sunday, and we started at 10 in the morning, and it was a great day. And we got to know each other, and I we talked about where we stand on things, and I feel like this was a fantastic deal we got. For It's good for Yuri, it's good for me, and it's good for British Columbia most of all, and for the center right vote in British Columbia. So to get down into some of the details, the major deal that we struck is that if Yuri wins the leadership, which I believe he's going to, he will agree to stand down the Conservative Party in 5 ridings in British Columbia so that One BC can run uncontested in those ridings. And this is a wonderful deal for us. And I think a very important deal for British Columbia too, because I know that our membership is still growing, our support is growing, and of course, people are very worried, understandably, about splitting the vote on the right. So I believe we've addressed that, and this will. One BC is basically perceived as the party that's holding the line on some really hard issues in this province that bring on all sorts of name calling against me and so on, but I won't go wobbly and I'll stand firm. And so people who are voting for the Conservatives now can know that that party needs me, and they need to get One BC to agree that we've held the line, and we will continue to do that for British Columbia. And I think Yuri is also a very talented and seasoned businessman, and he understands the magnitude of the problems facing BC right now on just a fiscal and economic level. We totally understand we're in big trouble, and the work ahead is going to be very serious work, and we need serious people.
Right. Well, it seems that uh, all the leadership hopefuls are in agreement on things like repealing DRIPA and sort of resetting the clock on Indigenous reconciliation. And that is being talked about. But as you mentioned, you are really the only one who is sort of addressing the elephant in the room, if you will, about Kamloops and other First Nations in BC and across Canada, where you have this backdrop of this specter of genocide and mass graves and this incredibly amped up uh, kind of atmosphere of allegation. So, because you're addressing those issues head on and you're speaking to them frankly, your popularity is growing. You
Yes.
have a significant following of people who are cheering you on. So, I know I've heard people criticize the deal, but it seems to make a lot of sense in a way because you can continue to have your un sort of moderated voice um, and speak to these issues the way you've been speaking to them in the past, which is resonating with a lot of British Columbians.
Correct. I I have to be realistic about uh, One BC as well. We're a strong party. We've just had some poll results come out today that say we're polling around 9.7%, 10, sometimes pushing 11. Some polls have had us closer to 13%. It's even stronger in the Fraser Valley and in the rural areas. But we are doing better than the Greens in the Lower Mainland now. And I think, but as a party, as we get closer to the election, we have to know that people would really support our group, but they need to make sure that we don't have another EB government, which is going to be, or an NDP government. I don't care who's running that party, it's going to be the same mess. And so we have to defeat the NDP. And I don't want anybody to think that I will do anything to deliberately be a spoiler in that effort. I want to help British Columbia move forward. I'm in this situation not through my own design. I was expelled from the Conservative Party approximately a year ago. It was March of last year for making that fateful post about there are zero bodies at Kamloops. And that started this whole journey for me. And so, as the world works, sometimes we're given a role that we didn't expect. And I've done this, and it hasn't always been pleasant. But I also know that truth is the most important thing in policy. And we have to have truth in order to build strong policy. Just like anything in life, all of our relationships rely on truth as well. A relationship that's built on a lie is never going to succeed, really. It will fall apart eventually due to the more and more lies that have to be told to support the original lie. And so we have to have truth as a foundation for everything we're doing. And I keep that. And so I guess what I'm saying is that I have to be realistic about the possibility for One BC. And I see this as a massive victory for our party. 5 seats is incredible. Imagine if we had gone into a general election and won 5 seats, I would have been jubilant at that. And so I think that this is a wonderful thing. And splitting the vote in British Columbia, as we know historically, the NDP will pretty much always get approximately 30 to 35% of the vote, no matter how disastrous their policies are. And so we have to make sure on the right that we don't do that. And I've heard that from a lot of people, and I'm aware of it too. I mean, I'm not a fool. I know the problems. So I'm thrilled because One BC, I can continue to be Dallas, and Yuri can be Yuri, and there will probably be times that we have disagreements, just like between the Greens and the NDP. This happens, but we are going to be a voice and a strong voice, and people in BC don't need to panic and think that all of the things I've been saying will disappear. And I can't tell you how happy I was last week. And also I want to give Yuri Fulmer credit for having the courage to come forward and say the reality is the Conservatives cannot win the next election without One BC being involved in it. Everybody else wants to pretend that's not going to be the truth, but it is the truth. We will result, like they need us to work together, and he had the courageousness to come forward and the foresight, frankly, to come forward and say we need to do a deal here and work this out. So I'm thrilled.
Hmm.
And I think it's been bad news for the NDP, who was hoping we would remain split, but I'm very happy.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this before about the classical divide between the left and the right.
Yeah.
It's not, and a sort of a new paradigm is emerging between the woke and the not woke. So I don't think it's fair to say that everyone who is a traditional NDP voter, someone who's in a union or is necessarily a woke person who is buying into a lot of the woke dogma around First Nations, land acknowledgements, ubiquitous, or gender ideology, or all of the DEI um, propaganda. They don't buy into that. So is it possible that people who may have be traditionally NDP would vote for One BC for your party, but not vote conservative because they can't bring themselves to do it?
Yes, and it's already happened. We did an event on Lasqueti Island, and a lot of those people were people who also said they've just never even listened to politics before. You know, they sort of said, you know, I'm just an old hippie and I just like to be left alone and live my life. And suddenly the Islands Trust, for example, is being heavily impacted by the decolonization movement. Quote, reconciliation, indigenization, decolonization, they're all part of the same parcel now. And they're finding out that race-based laws are being imposed now from top down on the islands. And these are people who, you know, left the mainstream urban areas to go live a life that's, you know, just leave us alone. And now they're finding this ideology superimposed on their private lives over there, and they're very unhappy about it. And they are, I would call, we're drawing from two groups. We're getting, you know, normal conservatives, but we're also getting people who normally don't even engage in the political process because they're so turned off. And then the third group is we are getting former NDPers and people who never signed up for saying, yes, I believe that a man can be a woman. This is driving people crazy. And these kinds of, you know, wackadoodle policies are alienating people, and driving people who have never been active before to get active. And they see that I'm standing up for what I consider not even extreme, like people say I'm extreme right. What's extreme about me saying a man can't be a woman? I think I'm normal. I think that I actually represent a normalcy. And I'm trying to say, let's make BC normal again. It's not normal to advocate for cutting off the breasts of a 14-year-old girl. That is radical, extreme, far out policy. And there was a time when we were all up in arms about genital mutilation in Islamic countries. And now we're here doing similar things to young girls. And all in the name of political correctness. And so, you know, these people don't like it. So you're exactly right. And we've actually asked some at some rallies we have, which are, by the way, usually standing room only, a lot of fun, people showing up. We sing the national anthem. I take my guitar. Some people bring their guitars too. We all play and we have a good time and get back to being normal again. And we said, how many people here have voted NDP in the past? And we get 25% of the room is putting up their hands. I mean, I'm not lying. I'm known for telling the truth. That's the truth. And then we say, how many people normally don't even vote? Another 10%? Hands go up? Yep. But I was hearing, and pretty much everywhere we went, is we are worried about the vote split. And that is a true concern. And so even if we are drawing from those two other pots of voters, it's still not enough. And we need to make sure we don't split the right. So, yeah.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Islands Trust situation. I worry that, you know, average British Columbians aren't really aware of what's happening there. And the way it kind of ties in with the Musqueam decision, you know, there's so much focus on Aboriginal title and how that has been declared at Cowichan, but that's a very long process to get a court decision. But this business of land use and who's in charge of what. I know with the Islands Trust, there's all this vague language about co-management of the resource. When it comes right down to it, that has real practical implications for what people are doing, say, in the Gulf Islands, or where someone can anchor a boat, or they can have a dock, or where they might be able to build a cabin.
Correct.
And this is sort of rolling out across the entire Lower Mainland with these agreements for co-management. So what is the status with the Islands Trust thing right now?
Well, the whole DRIPA mandate has now been sort of downloaded into their governing documents, is my understanding. And I have to do a deep dive into it. But what people are telling me is that, for example, any meetings they hold now that are about the island, like on Lasqueti, they're starting with these lengthy land acknowledgements, and it goes on and on. And if anybody says, hey, they're told you have to leave. I mean, it's gotten really sort of militant. And the other thing, like we know about a specific situation on Galliano, which involves a cemetery there, a cemetery that was started back in the, I guess, late 1700s or early 1800s by settlers who came to that island and apparently lived in peace and co-married and commingled and lived with the native people there. And there was a small cemetery there that has the tombstones and so on of people who died there but who were settlers, and it's called Cemetery for the Settlers of Galliano Island. And there are indigenous people buried there, settlers, and people who were married together or buried side by side, and they were, interracial or whatever you want to call it, marriages. So the cemetery that they had was tiny. It's just located sort of just off the water, and they had actually run out of room, and a lot of people still living there wanted to be buried in the same cemetery. So they did a fundraising work to raise money to buy another contiguous piece of land that's also not huge, but it was, a certain size. And this land was owned by a family from Seattle, and it was worth approximately $180,000. But this family, they're philanthropists, and they said, we'll sell it to you for half the price. So I believe the price ended up being around $90,000 for this contiguous plot. So they held the traditional way we used to raise money. They didn't use any government money. They raised it through bake sales, music nights, fundraising, I heard one resident of the island gave like $10,000 just because he was in support of having this cemetery there. And bearing in mind, this cemetery was open to everyone, whether you were Indigenous or non. And so it was like a non-racial cemetery. And so a decision was made to say that no more non-Aboriginal people can be buried there anymore. After they had bought the land, they had done this. And this is a true story that's going on in Galliano right now. And all these people who have done all this work actually to work together in unity with the Indigenous people on that island were caught like, what? What are you talking about? We've been friends for decades. We get along. My brother's married to, like, it was this huge upset. And it was somebody who came in onto the board and started pushing this. And they pushed all the right buttons and said, no, this is going to happen. And they actually went into the cemetery that was there with a little bobcat or whatever it was and dropped loam. And they rolled right over some people's headstones. And they dropped loam 8 inches deep over top of it and said, you're not allowed to ever dig below the surface again. And if you do want to do anything, you can sprinkle just on top of the loam. And they won't let any people be buried in the other property they've purchased now. So it's such a bizarre situation, but this is what's happened. And actually, when we were filming my documentary, Making a Killing, we interviewed an amazing woman there and the two men who run the island newspaper, and they are so upset. And these are not, people you would say are, racist and bad people. These are people who have been working with this community all the way through and raised money for them and helped them and loved them and actually worked to build a museum there that's filled with Native art and all these kinds of things. And so now they're finding out that they're not allowed to have, like, the one lady we interviewed is 82, amazing woman. And she just said, I can't believe this. I want to be buried beside my parents. They're there and they're telling me I can't be. And that's what's happened. And so this is one sort of small but big story for the island because it's caused this, of course, division and uproar when everybody was getting along. But this is part of it. And it came to my attention about Galliano because I was contacted by a resident there who showed me a flyer that came out from the island's trust, or the trustee groups that's over Galliano, saying that all people who weren't of Native ancestry now had to apply for development permits on the island, but anybody who could show their ancestry does not have to get a development permit. That was the first thing, and then came the cemetery. And so you can see that, and of course what bothers me about this is anything that's rooted in racist, like race-based laws is very dangerous. And like then it comes down to, well, who's Native and who's not, and how many degrees of Native, and so that's a little story from Galliano for you. And, they're finding out about the docks and things like that. People are finding out their docks aren't adequate or they have to be taken out. And, Pender Harbor's already been hit with that. That's not Islands Trust, but that's the territory being declared by the Sechelt Nation over vast areas of the Sunshine Coast, Nelson Island, Pender Harbor, Madeira Park, that area. So it's this joint governance thing that's the problem.
Yeah, so that's a really fascinating story, and it kind of shows how the larger context sort of trickles down to people's where they're buried. These,
Yes.
that's where it really hits people directly in their own backyards. So just to sort of zoom up to the other high level view, of course, all of this, there's a backdrop of the Kamloops and other First Nation announcements about unmarked graves and uh, this sort of unraveling story, this never-ending story of um, archaeological work that will never actually proceed to the excavation stage. So Roseanne Casimir of the Kamloops First Nation, the chief of that nation, was in Ottawa testifying before the Senate.
Yes.
And for those who have had a chance to look in, she said some unbelievable things and talked about decades, and she invoked the Holocaust, and while they're still excavating 75 years later. What's going on that someone can go to the Senate and talk that way and not really be held accountable?
From my perspective, like I was alerted to that Senate hearing, and I hope you'll put it in your video when this comes out because people need to watch. You want to see your Senate at work? Have a look at that. They're not working. They're pandering. They are asking the most ridiculously, not even, they're not even questions. It's it's a shocking display of what goes on in our government. But what's going on is now Roseanne Casimir, who's the chief of the Kamloops Indian band, was there basically asking for yet more money for the Kamloops Indian band and claiming that their excavation may go on, well, based on her comparing herself to the Holocaust, the exhumation of the unmarked graves that they say are there could take 75 years. And I mean, what do you say? I mean, that's just crazy. It's so wrong. And they sat there acting like this is a valid request from this chief. No tough questions. Is like, excuse me, we already sent you 12.1 million and then another 12.5 million to build a healing center. You still didn't find any bodies to this date. Just so your listeners know, not one body has been found at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School in an unmarked grave. There was a claim that went worldwide that there is this mass grave of little children at that school, and they had been discovered. And after that, Canada was labeled a genocidal state. Hundred churches burned and vandalized. We shoveled out 320 million across the country from the federal government for digging. This band in particular got 12.1. We had our flag lowered at half mast for almost 6 months. We've had UNDRIP. That's after that. It had sort of been floating as an aspirational document in Canada. Trudeau made it law after that, and it just kicked off. And the money, it's like the walls opened up and the money just flowed after that. And there has still been no bodies found. This is well known. $12.1 million earmarked for digging. And then 2 years later, they demanded more money to build a healing center to recover from the trauma of having not found bodies. So now that band has received approximately $25 million and still no proper investigation of this mass murder claim has been done. And she's now back asking for more money. And I was in shock. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Not only should you be resigning your position and apologizing to Canadians for making this horrid accusation before you actually had evidence, but now you're actually back asking for more money and let's not forget, that's money from you and me. The government doesn't have its own money, as we all know. The federal government is us. It's our money. And I've been saying, and a lot of people are calling for the 12.1 million that was given for digging to be returned to the taxpayer of Canada if they're not going to use it for digging.
Right. And, just thinking about this in the BC context right now, we've got a lot of economic problems.
Mm.
We're we're facing inflation, deficit, huge ballooning deficits. And the David Eby's been out there sort of suddenly championing mining as a way out of the problem, or LNG. All of these fossil fuel uh, resource extraction projects that they had heretofore been against.
Yes, yes.
They've never been pro resource extraction, to my knowledge. But what they're doing is they're saying, well, if we repeal DRIPA, if we don't sort of kind of bend to this narrative, if we question the narrative at all, well, it all's just gonna, all these projects are gonna blow up and go away. So if people think that the narrative of the graves is not having a direct economic impact on British Columbians, I don't think that's a correct assessment. They're directly connected.
Yes.
It's the moral kind of uh, righteousness that they think they have this mandate to make things right because of what happened at Kamloops. But the more time goes by, doesn't that sort of foundational moral authority just evaporate?
Well, yes, it's like we started off by saying the truth is really important, and that there needs to, Francis Widdowson often says there needs to be a reckoning about what happened at Kamloops. And let's face it, if people got carried away, if they got exaggerated, it got away on them, the media exploded, it became like this snowball that just built. It's okay to finally say, you know what? We got it wrong. We don't want to go on with this anymore. We were wrong about it, and or we will commit to digging, and we will prove to you that there are bodies, or we will show that there aren't, and we will finally have it out. And people will say to me, oh, are you only focused on that only focused on that issue? And I say this issue of Aboriginal land claims in BC is the issue that touches every other thing in this province now. It's now in our schools with land acknowledgements and the shaming days of Truth and Reconciliation Day, where you're supposed to be ashamed of your history and of John A. Macdonald and say how horrible Canadians have been and the Europeans. Then there's the part of the fact that we have to now, everything we do, particularly with DRIPA, all of our laws have to be aligned with this reconciliation agenda, which so I say to people, it's touching everything. There are even private, I've been told, and I checked the source and I checked to make sure, even in hospitals now, if you want a private room and there's one next door and it's sitting empty, they're saying, no, that's reserved for Aboriginal people, even if it's empty. So it's leaking into everything everywhere. And it's also affect that our resource extraction industry has been decimated by all of this. This reconciliation agenda plus the environmental groups that have really brought us to our knees, it's all got to stop because we can't survive anymore. And not to mention the increase in the amount of money that's been going to this cause. And as I try and remind people, the money is not going to the people you think it is helping. People living on reserves are still suffering. They are having, a lot of them, very sad and unpleasant lives. They are stuck living under the command and control of chief and council. They can't own their own property, things like that. And so we have to address this. And my position now is that this whole reconciliation agenda has to end. British Columbians need to know there's an end to this. And I cannot stress this enough. We can't go on with this hanging above us. And it would help Indigenous people more to get rid of this than to continue the way we are, because only an elite few are getting rich on this. And it's not all Native people. Chief and council, sure, they're probably doing well, particularly chiefs. But then there's the developers, consultants, and lawyers who have been making a lot of money off of this. And that's where I think we have to see an end to this. We have apologized. We have reconciled. And we need to get back to everybody working together. And that's what I'm hoping for. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And I get calls from even, Indigenous people saying, thank you. We're done. We want to own our own land. we're tired of the lack of accountability and on and on. So I,
Mhm.
it does touch everything, David, is what you're saying. And I don't know if that answered your question. Maybe I wandered a bit there, but
No, no. Well, another issue that I think that this connects into, believe it or not, is the overdose crisis.
oh yeah.
And that because the whole paradigm of decolonization is the idea that there's an oppressive uh, white supremacist structure that is bringing to bear these harmful impacts on marginalized people. And that's why we have an overdose crisis. So, and we're going to adapt our policies to um, free the people who are um, not, we don't want to stigmatize them as drug addicts. We see used words like drug users and the whole harm reduction and safe supply, decriminalization is all part and parcel of this kind of picture of society as being oppressive,
Mm.
colonial, violent system that has to be thrown off and reimagined as, I don't know, in a spiritual sense. And a lot of the spiritual thinking is just coming from the indigenous world. So if people don't think, I'd be interested in your comment on that, that this kind of narrative of genocide is also affecting how we approach the overdose crisis. And oh, well, we shouldn't incarcerate people because that would be kind of invoking this heavy-handed, colonial, violent, oppressive way of being.
Mhm.
But what do you think? Isn't it true that we really do need to invoke the Mental Health Act more and provide involuntary care? I know EB has talked about it, but is there any action happening on that involuntary care front that you can see?
From what I've seen so far, no. He has said that he agrees with it now after his years of advocating for decriminalization in drugs and destigmatizing drug use, which in my view is an absolute catastrophe. Like, who would ever destigmatize drug use? If you have children, there's no way you tell them, "Oh, it's okay. Go try heroin, give it a shot, go, oh, sure, go smoke some crack or I don't know what they do with it or snort it. Go do that." What parent would do that? I mean, it's sheer folly to say that we shouldn't stigmatize drug use. Drug use should be stigmatized. I'm not talking about beating up on the people who end up addicted. I'm talking about drug use, just like cigarette use, we stigmatized for decades. Like we banished cigarette smokers from bars and they have to go outside and stand in the cold and they're not even allowed to stand within 6 feet of the front of an office building. Oh, it's okay to stigmatize them, but then when it comes to drugs, oh, we have to say that they're normal people and it's nice to stand next to a drug addict who's screaming at you or scaring you or has no pants on or something. I mean, it's just it's fantasy land, and this whole what are we? My view of what we need to have is we need to have involuntary care because we see I've gone walking downtown, and I'm sure you have too, and seen these poor people lying in the rain, face down, not even knowing where they are, uh, literally, I guess, freezing to death, and people just walk by and act like that's an okay situation now because oh, that's their right to lie in the dirt, and we shouldn't care because this is the rights that they fought for. The drug DULF, the Drug Users Liberation Front, and VANDU, the Vancouver area network of drug users, VANDU and DULF, have pushed to say these people have a right to have the lifestyle they want. Well, now they're lying face down, completely damaged, probably freezing to death, probably sick, and also out of it, unconscious or possibly sometimes even dead, and people just walk by. If it were, God forbid, my child, I would want that safety van to come by, scoop her up, take her somewhere, triage her, get her dry, cleaned up, find out what's going on, and then detox with whatever's needed to do it, and then into an immediate program somewhere in a part of BC where they're not in the drug milieu, and they can start to get better and learn some skills. And wouldn't that be great if one of my children ended up in that situation, or you know, your husband or anybody you love, wouldn't you prefer they were being taken care of and you knew that someone took them somewhere warm? And yes, they are not able to make a decision at that point. They're not thinking straight. They're in the grips of addiction. You, we don't allow people to change their wills in BC after they've developed dementia. Why? Because after you're mentally ill, you can't make good decisions anymore, and you can be influenced inappropriately. There's all estate law is deep into, people trying to influence an elderly person with dementia to change their will and have succeeded, and then the rest of the family has to oppose that change because it was done when the person was, what is it, non compos mentis or whatever when it was done. And these rules have been developed through the ages because they know there are times in your life when you're not capable of thinking and rationalizing and making appropriate decisions. And anybody who's lying on the street down there deeply into fentanyl or whatever these addictions are is not thinking straight, and they can't make decisions. They're not barely human thinking anymore at that point. The
Well,
drugs are thinking for them.
well, sometimes, activists will talking points will go like this. Well, Indigenous people are disproportionately represented in the in prison system and in situations of addiction. So therefore, your policies are just anti-Indigenous. So in other words, the Indigenous lens has to be applied to everything. So all of our policies kind of stack up and are these policies that clearly are not working. There's always an argument from the Indigenous lens that, well, they're this way because we need to recognize the legacy of trauma of residential schools and how this is impacting everyone down the line. So I've heard that argument so many times, but I guess it's what I'm saying is that is this evidence that these policies that are affecting so many people in a negative way are being justified on the wrong basis? That the Indigenous argument is being used to shape policies that are not helping Indigenous people at all.
Yeah. And let's also remember that Indigenous children are also the word overrepresented in foster care situations. So, and these are bands and chiefs who claim they want self-government, all the money to conduct their all cultural ceremonies and have their cultural. And I don't remember anybody trying to stop someone from having an event in the reserve but I believe that they can do cultural ceremonies that they want. But if they are overrepresented and you want to be a self-governing, I've often said, well, then why aren't you coming down and getting these poor dear girls and boys who are down here lying face down, and bring them home and use your cultural traditions to bring them back to health? Certainly the money is being given to the bands to do this. They're getting money for, I've been told, because I get calls from people saying they get money, saying this is money that's supposed to go to specifically getting people off drugs who are in your band. And then this woman said the money comes in and everybody's sitting there playing cards. And if someone really does need an addicted, I'll let them go to the main hospital. I mean, so I say, like, why don't you care that it's your people there? But then I say, but it shouldn't be like that anyway. We should all be the same people. A human being is a human being is a human being. We all need to be picked up off the street and taken somewhere to help them. And I just think it's backwards to say you're overrepresented. Well, I don't know what else to say about that. Is that an excuse to leave them lying there? I don't think so. And I don't think it's a good plan. And I don't think this woke oppressed paradigm works at all. I am completely opposed to this. What it's just it doesn't work, and it becomes an excuse for who's the greater victim, and it's all about celebrating that I'm a bigger victim than you are, so I should get more. And I want to switch the thinking in British Columbia to say, let's celebrate achievement and success and people moving forward. Yes, we need to take care of people who are crippled, or they're aged, or they're suffering. But we can't do any of that unless we have a thriving economy, first of all, that's built upon pursuit of excellence and achievement and growing our economy. So anything that starts with this oppressed oppressor thing, I just say, oh no, don't bring that to me. I don't want to hear it. Bring me answers. Bring me, and I want results. If we give you this money, we want results for what you've promised to do here. And if you don't get the results, your program's canceled.
Okay, well, speaking of victims, a few months ago, you went to the UBC campus, and I
Yeah.
was there, and the Westminster Times was there. And I must say, I would say that there was harm directed at you, and you were harmed. I mean,
Yeah.
the level of sort of intimidation and borderline assault with air horns going off right next to your head. What's happened since that time when it just seemed like this explosion of anger and horror? There been any follow-up with you to address the harms that and this kind of attack that it was Francis and yourself uh,
And Jim McMurtry was
and
there.
Jim McMurtry and this kind of I don't know, it's hard to unworldly unleashing the of hell upon you guys. Has UBC done anything? Has been any follow-up to that?
We wrote letters both to the Board of Governors and the president of UBC and to the RCMP detachment out there. The responses we got were, in a word, pathetic. They tried to say, we kept everyone safe and that's good enough. And it's not. And, these extraneous things like you don't have a permit, or you don't have, we kept everybody safe. That's the only job we have. And it was word salad. We got back trying to dodge it. And we wrote back several times saying, you're still not addressing our concerns. One of my assistants went out to meet with the RCMP, and it was complete push away, push back. We are not doing anything about this. We're leaving it. I think the Board of Governors, they're all really nervous about this because they know it's wrong. But if they say anything, off with your head. And at that event, by the way, like, let's remember what it was like that day. We were swarmed, and this group was there ready. It was called the Communist Revolutionary Party, Revolutionary Communist Party of UBC. Antifa was there. There were a couple of other groups that have names. The student union reporters were there, and but it was a mob, and a lot of it was organized by people who aren't students at the university, for sure.
Mhm.
And they were very organized. They had loud hailers that they were screaming at us in. But I also got hit on my arm by a young guy. He just ran up, talked to me for a minute, and then whacked me on the arm and ran away. And another guy came by and like did a shoulder shiver, like slammed me from the side. I'm like, wow. If I had been like not fit or whatever, I for sure would have gone down. Like where I was able to stand because I'm, fit and I didn't go over, but other people might have fallen right down. And they were chasing us off campus. They swarmed us, swore at us. And some of these people got up really close to me, and I swear they were amped up on something because their eyes were just bulging. They had sweat on their foreheads, faces twitching, screaming, screaming and screaming and screaming and swearing, and like a bunch of fiends.
It
And it
was
looked like
it was
just like
intense.
a crazed mob. It was like, wow, who would have thought at UBC?
Well, wasn't there a case in Ottawa where a protester or counter protester was charged with assault for something using an air horn? too close to a member of parliament. So I think this went to court, and the person was charged with assault. So they may think it was innocuous, but I thought it was kind of a violence, a form of assault to take an air horn too close to someone's ear, and the decibels simply can damage your hearing. So anyway,
Yeah, I
so
agree with you, but no charges have been laid as a result of that.
nothing.
We went out and specifically gave photos, film, video, everything. And remember, the mob chased us into the aquatic center and were banging on the windows. I mean, it went on and on for an hour and a half or so. We were surrounded and swarmed in that building, and it was shocking. And the police had to arrange for a bus to remove us from campus for our safety. Um, and you were there, David, so you saw it all. And the air horns were being blown right in our ears, and the sirens. And then another woman came up with this large thing that was sort of on fire, like this bark or something, shoving smoke in my face. It was amazing. I guess,
Yeah,
they were whipped up into a frenzy.
right. Well, you would hate to have to bring I'm sorry, what do they call it when when a private citizen brings a prosecution?
Oh, the private prosecution. I've done that once already against the terrorist group, but you
Right.
know, but it's
I was
hard
going to
work.
ask you about that because there's another example of this kind of double standard where you have the Samadoun activists literally calling for violence against Jews and praising terrorists, and
Mhm.
then arrested. We're talking about Charlotte Cates, and I know no charges were approved by Nikki Sharma, the Attorney General. So you took it upon yourself to bring up a private prosecution against Charlotte Cates because no one else was doing it. So that's kind of a very bold step. So is there any developments in that case?
Well, I did have my process hearing last December and I represented myself. We went into court, so the Crown Counsel was there. And of course, I have a legal background. So actually, it was a relief to be back in court after the rough and tumble of politics. I was like, oh, I couldn't believe I was more relaxed being back in a courtroom than being
Right.
in the legislature. But it was such nice. So we went in there and we made argument, and the judge said it still needs the federal attorney general's approval and consent because we went under the terrorism provisions of the criminal code instead of the hate speech provisions. The hate speech provisions could have been approved by Nikki Sharma in BC. And so we went under the terrorism, and then the Crown Counsel explained to the judge that it still needs. His name's Sean Fraser. He's the federal attorney general, and we're still waiting to hear. I haven't heard anything. So when I get some time, we're going to follow up on that. I mean, I'm not holding my breath because it doesn't seem like any of these governments want to go after these groups, but that situation was shocking because the police did arrest Charlotte Cates approximately 2 years ago, and they did a whole write-up, and they actually recommended charges. And I think that was under the hate speech provision. She was charged at that time as opposed to the terrorism provisions. And Nikki Sharma wouldn't give the consent for it. And it's been languishing on her desk now for almost 2 years. And what self-respecting attorney general wouldn't approve those charges? At her events, she was not only shouting death to Canada and these kinds of things, but she was giving out pamphlets that explained to people how to do a multifaceted, multi-target terrorist attack, step-by-step instructions. And I mean, imagine if I were doing that or you were doing that. I,
Yeah, the level
I don't
of
understand how this can be happening at all. And promoting absolute hatred for, Jew hatred and hatred for Israel and hatred. And we're allowing it to blossom and grow in our society. And why do we worry so much about anti-Semitism? Because it is the oldest and most toxic hatred and allowed to blossom. It usually rears its head in a big way when the underlying society is sick and people are looking for someone to blame for everything that's going wrong. And they have been the target throughout history, and it's extremely dangerous. And I am very concerned that governments of all levels in this country are not dealing with this properly. We need charges laid. And yeah, Sammy
Yeah.
Dune, by the way, has apparently changed its name. They've dissolved the organization Sammy Dune recently, and they've started up under another name. I can't remember the name of it right now, but Sammy Dune is a listed terrorist entity in Canada. And Charlotte Cates was one of the two co-founders of that organization. So that's why, and she is a virulent anti-Semite, Jew hater. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know this is federal. The Bill C-9 is working its way through the parliamentary process, uh, allegedly to make it easier to bring charges against someone like Charlotte Cates. But people are saying, wait, hold the phone. That's not really what it's all about. It's just going to make it easier for people like you and me or whoever's not on site, or maybe Barry Neufeld or Amy Ham or Jim McMurtry, or for those people to be hauled off to jail. And it's being done in the name of protecting Jewish people. And by the
I
way,
know.
I would agree that anti-Semitism should not be lumped in with all other forms of racism, because it's not the same
No.
as racism generally. It is much, much more serious and deeply embedded in Western society than anything else. I mean, just look at the Holocaust and all these comparisons to the Holocaust. It's really trivializing the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So that's Bill C-9. But what's the latest in Victoria? Uh, what are the latest ways they're kind of clamping down on free speech of everything but anti-Semitic remarks?
Well, I guess really they're clamping down on free speech with the Health Professions Act.
Right.
And I also think there's a real risk to free speech in the legal profession now with the new Legal Professions Act. Yes, the Law Society is taking the government to court, but things are proceeding forward with government political appointees being put in charge of governing lawyers and doctors now, which I consider very dangerous. The new act, which came into force on April 1st, Bill 36, the Health Professions Act, health I think it's Health Professions Occupations Act, HPOA, is frightening. And the thing that stands out for me the most is that it allows the government access to your private health records without a warrant and for any reason.
Mm.
So imagine how that could be abused. There's somebody saying stuff they don't like. They go get their medical records, find out they're having trouble with, I don't know, whatever, they're on a certain drug or they're getting help with something very private, and they can destroy their career over that. And the other thing is some psychologists who are in my riding approached me as a constituent saying they were very worried about this because the psychologists are being told that their audit notes or the notes they take during sessions with their clients will be open for review by government people. And this is an exaggeration. And they had already told me that one psychologist said, I've lost two clients who are practicing doctors who are having marital and other personal issues, and they cannot risk anymore coming for help because they're afraid that the government will get the notes about their sessions and use it and destroy their livelihood. And a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists are saying they don't want to practice anymore because how do you take care of people if you can't take notes? You can't remember every detail from session to session in your head. You have to take some notes, and those are now open for review. I mean, who want take a politician like me? What if I've got problems going on like say if I was going through marriage break, you don't know, or dealing with something terrible or sad or difficult, and I know that an opposing member wants to get access to that. Yeah, you bet they'll get it. And it'll
Mm.
be, oh, sorry, it got leaked out somehow. Whoopsie daisy. Or just brought in to say, oh, this doctor's not competent anymore. because they had a suicide attempt 3 years ago and now they're getting counseling for, you know what I mean? Like, you don't know what people are going through. But anyway, that's happening. And
Mm,
there are other things about the act that are dangerous, and also that if a doctor is not allowed to give any advice that goes against the public health officer's viewpoints, which dives into the mandates problem again. So even if your client, your patient, is not at all suitable for a shot or whatever that's being pushed by the government and could, in fact, damage them, they're not allowed to tell them that. I
mm.
mean, I don't know why we're going this far with this. It seems crazy. Uh, but that's a real limit. And then doctors who don't go along with these things can be fined, I think it's like up to $500,000 and 2 years in jail. I mean, this isn't a joke. And doctors are really worried about this. And so, and legitimately so, I think. But it's been pushed through. And so that's a limitation. But Bill C9 has a lot of people worried. And I know it's not going to be used against Charlotte Cates. It's going to be used against people like me.
Yeah, well, maybe we could end on this note. So there's a leadership race underway for the BC Conservative Party. And but that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be an election in the province of BC. We don't know. But given all of the things that we just talked about,
Mhm.
the changes to these acts that affect our healthcare, um, the kind of secret backroom deals that are being done with Indigenous people, people are very concerned that suddenly there's announcement after announcement about a deal and that's been worked out with this First Nation or that First Nation, Musqueam included. It was like a this bombshell announcement taking everyone by surprise on a Friday afternoon. Well, that's
We
the
haven't even
government of
talked about
Canada.
that one today,
We
David.
haven't even talked about that one. That's the government of Canada. But how how is it that this government can stand? How can we kind of eke along without an election? It seems like there's so much uh, these incredible, tense, difficult, insane, crazy things are happening, but we're not going to the polls.
I know it's hard to imagine that we're stuck with this government until the end of 2028. I mean, it's unsustainable. The everything's cracking. Nothing's working. Healthcare is absolutely in shambles. Absolutely in shambles. Uh, Nothing's working. People are afraid to get sick now. You know, you go for help and everybody's told, oh, it's just in your mind, or just go home. Sorry, there's a lineup. We can't do anything for you. This is not okay. This is, I mean, we've reached really the end point of just decades of, moving more and more towards like communist administration of everything. But so I don't know. In Without a non-confidence vote, there's really no other way to bring this government down. David Eby said this week that he is going to suspend certain portions of DRIPA that involve the mining business, but those are very thin slivers of DRIPA overall. And he's even taking heat from the chiefs over those small amendments. We'll see if he even introduces them, but he has declared that vote a confidence vote. And is it TG? TG, the head of the BC Assembly of First Nations or something? He said, well, David Eby has three Indigenous members of his caucus, and they better not vote in favor of this. So,
Yeah.
so now, and this reveals the conflict that exists if you're in government and your first loyalty is to your band rather than to your constituents. That's something that I've been bringing out with respect to Musqueam as well. You're in a conflict now because your interests as a band are now in conflict with the people you're supposed to be representing. That's the very definition of a conflict. Your
Mhm.
personal interests are you going to put them ahead of your constituents? And if those three members don't vote with their government, what does that mean? Is the government going to come down? So this is going to be an interesting couple, like we're off this week, but the following week and the week after, we'll be watching this really carefully and maybe there will be an election over this. Maybe David Eby's sick of dealing with this and would love to throw it back to the voters and say, you fix this. I mean, we really are coming apart at the seams now. And so the Musqueam agreement really rocked people's worlds. Yes, that's the federal government, but David Eby said he didn't know about it. Then we found he was at the signing ceremony. Then he said he was at the signing ceremony, but didn't know what he was there for. Then later we found out the federal government said, yes, he had been fully briefed. I mean, that agreement is a whole other podcast with you, I guess.
Well, that's right. It's almost like there's the confidence votes in the legislature, which
Yes.
can bring down the government, but it seems like the confidence amongst the voters and regular British Columbians is evaporating very quickly, and it's not necessarily just with staunch conservatives. It seems that there's all this levels of doubt creeping in amongst more rank and file NDP people who are just they work union jobs in the north. They work on pipelines. They work on all these things. So it just seems like an unsustainable situation to have all of this stuff going on and all these kind of secret deals. Uh, it's like, oh, well, I guess that's the other point is the media. It's like,
Oh,
shouldn't the media just be
pounding.
tearing them to shreds right now over all of these
Yeah.
bizarre secret deals and lack of transparency? Why aren't they going after them? I saw an interview with TG by Jordan Armstrong.
Yeah, I saw it too.
He almost asked a hard question, but it was very
Everybody's
softball.
so, I don't know why people are so afraid of this issue. They're laughing their heads off at us. We say one word and you all go running and say, oh, you're a racist. Or now they're apparently calling David Eby a colonialist. The leaked tapes showing that they're calling him names now. And I actually have some sympathy for him. I feel like writing him a letter say, what does it feel like, David, to be called things you're not? Now you know how it feels because you've called me a few things, right? But he's being called a colonialist. I don't know if they use the R word, but the thing is like these and I am in shock at the behavior of the legislative journalists. They they and our politicians for the last 25 years have allowed this thing to become an absolute disaster. If there had been good journalism being done over the last 25 years and proper governance where we weren't just running and hiding and fearful of someone calling us a racist, then we wouldn't be in this pickle. But they've all been sort of cushioning this issue and never wanting to ask the tough questions because it would be rude or offensive or bad. But you have to all, here's the principle I abide by. If you are taking public money, taxpayers' money from me and you and everybody else listening, all questions are on the table. All questions. It doesn't matter what your ancestry is. If you're taking public money, we get to know everything about what you're doing with it and where it's going. And we need results. And if we're not getting results, the money goes away. And if you don't want questions, then raise the money yourself through private investment funds or bake sales or whatever other way, and then no one will bother you. But it's amazing, like Keith Baldry, even Vaughn Palmer, Rob Shaw. Oh, Rob Shaw. Like these guys, and Stephen Quinn at CBC and Mike Smith. Mike Smith won't even, he's never invited me on his show. Can you believe that? I'm asking some of the toughest questions in this province, and Mike Smith doesn't even phone me. Stephen Quinn, they'll allow people to come on and say all manner of horrible, and Jazz Joe Hall, they'll allow people to come on for a full half an hour and talk about me and say, oh, she's horrible, she's vile, she's disgusting, she's diabolical. But they never call me and give me my own half an hour. And it's so biased. If anybody thought before that it wasn't as maybe as bad as you were thinking it was, I can tell you it's actually 100 times worse than you thought it was. I've even left the ledge sometimes and gone to Vaughn and say, I gave you something good today for your column. I asked a question about the Musqueam deal saying, skip the private property. Let's talk about all the public stuff you just gave them. They now have the international shipping lanes, international borders, the port of Vancouver, all of the public property throughout the Lower Mainland, which would include parks, hospitals, schools, military reserves, you name it, boulevards, beaches, foreshores, you know, on and on. And so does that give them the right now to change the names of everything? So even if they say they're not coming and like throwing you out of your house, you're now pinched in around all of the ownership that's all around you. And the problem with this, well, there are so many problems with this, but one of the biggest ones is that if they're given joint decision-making authority over all this, and we don't like the decisions, you can't vote out the band. I mean,
Yeah.
so, and if they get the right to tax us in the future, then that's literally taxation without representation, which was what they said you could no longer do in the United States because that's what the monarchy did. If you can't vote them out, then you're not allowed to tax people. And so this is where we're headed. It's just astounding to me it's gotten this far.
Well, maybe that's a good point
Extraordinary.
to end on. I know I'm involved in public companies and have been in my career. And there's a principle in securities law. If you're going to be taking money from the public, you have to have what's called full, true, and plain disclosure. So that principle, to my mind, what has happened is that the indigenous grievance narrative is provided kind of a smokescreen behind which that full, true, and plain disclosure is hiding. Well, we don't have to because of the sensitivities of this and that.
Yeah.
I think that's not really fair to the public.
No.
And that's not a racist thing to say. I don't think this sort of smearing it all as racist, just simply asking for full, true, and plain disclosure, how is that somehow involving race? It's not. It's the public's money. It's taxpayer funded. These questions should be asked. And you're asking them, we're asking them, and maybe the mainstream media will someday ask them. I'm being generous. So,
Well, I hope they do start asking them. And I also say, okay, call me whatever names you want. I still have the questions. Okay. Let's get past all the name calling because they use names to shut you down because it is awful to be called names. Who likes it? It's unpleasant. It's really, and it's unfair. But how do you prove a negative, or disprove a negative? Like, that expression, when did you stop beating your wife? What? I was never beating my wife, so, but but they just call you names. And I've done some research on this. Apparently the tactic of calling people racist has been used from 40, it started being used about 50 years ago to shut people down, and it worked for a long time. But people are now saying, okay, enough's enough. We now have to talk about the policy and where the money's going. And, but they call it colonial harm when you ask the questions. That's the new verbiage for that.
oh yeah,
You're
the old
inflicting
harms are just
colonial
being,
harm.
people are being re-traumatized
Yeah.
simply by asking questions. And
Yeah.
well, clearly we need to talk further on all of this. There's so
Yeah.
much more to get into,
I know.
but we'll leave it there for now. Dallas Brodie, thank you so much for taking time to speak to me and to talk to our audience. It's very much appreciated. We're going to be following very closely the whole leadership debate and how things work out with Yuri Fulmer. And I thank you again, and all the best as you get back into the legislature.
Thank you, David. And I can say if people really want to help me, probably the best way right now is to join the Conservative Party and vote for Yuri. And because we have a solid deal. And by the way, nobody else came to me with this courageous proposal. So I have a lot of admiration for him, and he's a highly respected manager and a very decent human being. And I really hope that he wins. So thank you for your
Yes,
show, and thanks for having me on, David, very
yes,
much.
we have reached out to the Fulmer campaign and hope to have him to have an interview with him as soon as possible. I know there's lots going on in the campaign, but it's still a fair ways away until everything is voted on.
Well,
But
the sign up for the memberships, if you want to vote in it, is the deadline is April 18th. That's why all
right.
the leadership candidates are hustling right now. But we'll just see what happens with that. I'm sort of sitting back and watching, and um, you know, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for filling us in on all that and talking about all these critical issues to the province of BC. Dallas Brodie, leader of One BC, member of the Legislative Assembly for Vancouver-Quilchena. I get that right?
Yeah, you got that right.
Okay. All right. Thanks again. And thanks everyone else for watching. We really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you
Bye.
very much, everybody. Bye, David.
Bye.